Now, it is time to understand the lifecycle methods in ReactJS. So what are the lifecycle methods and how do they play a crucial role in the entire component development lifecycle? Okay, so as the name itself says, lifecycle methods. So these are the methods which corresponds to each component in the ReactJS. And as I mentioned earlier, only class-based components have the right to define this lifecycle methods, and functional components doesn't have any credibility to define the lifecycle methods. Okay, so it is very important to understand the lifecycle methods because we do control the state of the component using these lifecycle methods. So before getting started, let's see what are the phases in component lifecycle. So the entire journey of the component on the web browser or on the web page has been segregated into different phases. So understanding each of these phases gives you a clear path on how you can grasp the knowledge on lifecycle methods. So mainly, whenever you're creating a component and that component is appearing on the browser window, let's say you opened a main content component or the profile page component. Okay, so when you open the profile page, that component gets onto the browser window and you perform certain actions on it. Maybe it is updating, you follow, you unfollow, whatever it is, right? And after that, you are moving away from the profile page. It means the component is being removed on the browser window, right? So all of this has been broadly classified into 4 different phases. So these are the 4 different phases, which is initialization, which is first time when the component is going to appear on the browser window. So when you define a React component, you have been given various stages where you can interrupt or where you can execute certain actions in different phases of the component. So initialization. So initialization is the phase where your component is getting onto the browser or your component is going to render for the first time. That is the initialization phase. And then we have the mounting phase, which means mounting means after the initialization, it is going to appear on the browser. So initialization means initializing the data, properties, whatever it is needed for it. And after initialization, it comes onto the browser window and it mounts. Mounts means taking its place on the browser. So after initialization, we won't move on to the mounting. And once the component is mounted onto the browser window, it means now as a user, you can perform certain operations which can make it or which can move it into updation phase. So maybe I'm clicking on the component, maybe I'm reloading the component, maybe I'm what else? Maybe I'm changing the state of the component. So whatever it is. So let's say on an Instagram profile component, I'm clicking the follow back or removing my followers or whatever it is. Maybe somebody else is following me, so the count is getting increased. So once the component is mounted on the browser window, it enters into the updation phase. So once it comes and multiple times it will be updating based on the user actions. So as long as the component is on the browser and user is performing certain actions, all of those actions and everything comes under the updation phase right after the mounting for the first time, and whatever data actions or changes or events are happening on the component or maybe happening because other components, you remember, right? When even the parent component changes, the child component re-renders, right? So after coming onto the browser window for the first time and then updating the data is in the updation phase. And the last phase, that is just before removing the component from the browser window. So what else? So it's just like you're born, you're entering into a stage and then you're updating, you're progressing, and after that you're being removed from the browser window. So unmounting is the last phase where the component is being just removed. So when it is just being removed from the browser, that phase is called as unmounting phase. So these are the different phases in the component lifecycle. So, and throughout the journey of the any React.js component, specifically the class components, they all go through these phases for sure. Okay, so each of these phases have lifecycle methods associated with them, which we can use for various applications. So trust me, lifecycle methods are the main methods which will really give you a fine-grained control over the components which you are defining. So the props, the state, and the lifecycle methods are the core concepts of the React.js, how it works and how you have the control over components, right? In that fashion, now let's understand what are the different lifecycle methods in each of the phase and how you can leverage them, and how those lifecycle methods can be reused for different use cases, and what are the limitations of it and what are the use cases of it, right? So first, let's see the initialization phase. So initialization phase is the first phase where the props and the initial state. So if you remember, in the initialization phase, we set the props and the state. So in the constructor, those values are being set in the initialization phase and nothing else is happening. So initialization phase is pretty simple. Whatever code is present in the constructor, only that code is being executed, and it happens only once in the life cycle of the component, right? Similarly, now we will be moving on to the most important phase, or the mounting phase. Okay, so the mounting phase is the phase where the component is just going to appear on the browser window. So after initialization, the component is now taking its place on the browser window so that user can perform his actions on whatever events or actions we actually give him, like clicking, reloading, etc. Right? So in the mounting phase, we have this four different life cycle methods which are being called. Again, mounting phase happens only one time in throughout the component journey, but this is very important phase for certain actions. We'll see what are those. Okay, so mounting phase mainly has the first function as constructor. So constructor code is executed. So initialization and mounting phase can be clubbed together because both mounting and initialization happens only once. So combining both of these phases, the methods inside the mounting phase are constructor. So first the constructor code is executed. Then there is a lifecycle method called as get derived state from props. So this is one lifecycle method which is called right after the constructor method. Okay, and what happens in the get derived state from the props? So as the name itself says or gives you a hint what it is actually doing. So you might get some small confusion. Hey, he's talking about a lot of lifecycle methods and we need to implement that, right? So if you remember, when you're defining a class-based component, you are extending react.component, right? React.component. So when you're extending all of those components, you are getting to implement. So you are getting a chance to implement all of these functions if you feel they are important to your application. So constructor, if you want to initialize any data, get derived state from props. Get derived state from props, the name suggests that if you want to derive your state of the component from the props which your parent is sending. So what we have discussed previously, props are the data owned by the component. Are the data passed to you by your parents, right? So if you want to derive your state out of these props, like in our previous examples, we understood that to display the completed, in progress, and not initiated tasks, what we have done, we have implemented some computation and we filtered out the array and we calculated. So now you can actually use this lifecycle method to derive the state. So you can store how many number of completed and how many number of in progress and how many number of in not initiated uh, tasks are present in your practical guides, right? So you can use this lifecycle methods and you can actually derive the state of that component from the data passed by your parent, that is props. Okay, and after the get derived state from props, render method is called. So render method is present in almost all the phases, both in mounting and updating phase, because you get the data and your component should render again to display the updated data. So render method is basically pushing or painting or rendering on the browser window, right? Similarly, after render, you have the component did mount phase, component did mount lifecycle. So this is one of the important lifecycle method, and this is the lifecycle method where you can make the initial API calls to the backend server to fetch the data. So component did mount is a very important lifecycle method. You can perform a lot of actions over here, which is very good practice to do as well. That is getting the data and whatever you want to change the styling of the component, because now the component has been on the is appeared on the browser. So once the component appears on the browser, this component lifecycle is called component did mount, past tense component did mount. Okay, so in mounting, previously we used to have component will mount, so which is just before the component is getting mounted onto the browser. So invoked once and immediately before React inserts the component into the DOM. But this has been renamed or and added some changes to this component will mount lifecycle, and it is no more existent now. This has been renamed to, or not just renamed, added some other powers as well, like get derived state from props, which receives both props and state as an argument. So let's see what is get derived state props does and what is the implementation of it. But yeah, component will mount, if you come across this, it means that they are using the older version of React. In the newer version, there is no component will mount lifecycle, that is just before the component is going to mount it on the browser. We have removed that component will mount and we have added some more powers, and we identified that the clear use case of component will mount would be get derived state from props. So, and the component did mount is also invoked only once and immediately after React inserts the component onto the DOM. So when component takes its position on the DOM, that is document object model, or the logical representation of the HTML document. So mounting phase has 4 lifecycle methods: constructor, get derived state from props, render, and component did mount. Component will mount has been renamed to, or has been removed, and you bought a new lifecycle method, that is get derived state from props. Okay. Now the updation phase, or the phase where the component is in a longer duration. So this is the phase where the component is in longer duration, and also this is the phase where your actual React.js code is dependent on the performance. Like if the component is getting updated unnecessarily, then your entire React.js code is a very bad code and you will lose the performance to the worst situation. So trust me, in React, you can write a application which is very good. And if you're not following, or if you're not confident, or if you don't know the concepts of React.js very well, then you can write a worst application. So it doesn't matter you're writing React. So it can give you either best or the worst. Middle thing is not possible. So it is always recommended. It is always recommended to learn React.js to its best and understand each concept very, very well. Okay. So in the updation phase, it is again segregated to 2, but on a high level, you have you have 5 lifecycle methods. Again, component will receive props has been renamed to, or has been replaced by get derived state from props. Okay, so both the component will mount and component will receive props is now equal to get derived state from props. Okay. And after that, you have another method, lifecycle method, that is called as should component update. Okay, should component update. So inside the should component update, you will call, you will determine, okay, if I have to update my component or not. Like if you remember, we have faced an issue where though the data is not getting changed, your component is being rendered, which means you have written a bad code basically. So you need to update, you need to check. So this should component update returns a boolean. This should component update returns a boolean which controls how that if a component should render or not. I mean, it should re-render or not in the updation phase. So if you return false by default from should component update, it will never update and it will never enforce a re-render. Okay, again, component will update has been renamed. So let's see what is the component will update has been renamed to. It has been renamed to, so after should component update, now the latest version of the React.js calls in this order. First, get derived state from props, then should component update, which we have just seen, and next the render method. So there is no will update and will mount in the React. Okay, in the React lifecycles. I'm just discussing this because some people might be using the older version of React and maybe you get to see this will update and will mount, right? But yeah, the current updation phase of the React.js is that get derived state from the props, should component update, then render method, and then get snapshot before update. We'll see what is this get snapshot before update. And last lifecycle is component did update. So basically, it first the get derived state, then should component update, which determines if I have to update or not, and the render function. So based on the value returned from should component update, if it is true or false, render method will re-render, and get snapshot before update. So it is the use case of this is that get snapshot before update. Basically, even after the rendering, it has access to the previous state. So get snapshot before update. Basically, this lifecycle method, it is called after the update. It is called after the update, but it still has access to the properties or the state which it has a snapshot. It has snapshot of the component structure which used to look how it was before the state update. So let's say before the render, I mean in the updation phase before the render, the count of likes is 100, and after, so how do you look? 100 likes and some comments, etc. Right? Now get snapshot before update will have that exact HTML content which has 100 likes and this. So even after the update, it has the access to how the component would look like in the previous state. And component did update, it is called after the end of the updation phase, that is component did update. So updation phase is an infinite. So it is not just a one-time thing. As long as the data is updating or the props injected from the parent are changing, the updation phase keeps on occurring. So updation phase is one phase which is present until the component is being removed from the browser window. So this is very, very important phase and a crucial phase where it determines the performance of your application. So you need to handle this phase very well, and lot of actions actually we perform a lot of actions actually on the component did update lifecycle. So this gets very, very complicated as the application grows. So very, very important phase, guys, right? And in the last phase, which is called as component unmounting phase. So this function, in this phase, we have only one single life cycle, that is component will unmount. So component will unmount can be really useful in certain situations. Like just before removing the component, you want to do some actions. Let's say I have the profile component with me, and that profile component is using the browser's local storage, maybe because it is fetching a lot of data, or it doesn't want to use the device. I mean, it doesn't have to depend on the memory. I mean, maybe user closes the app and opens up again. Instead of fetching the data always from the backend, which is a network operation, it might use the local storage so that it keeps the memory, it keeps the data inside the local storage. Okay, so when that profile component is being removed from the app, it is the profile component's responsibility to clear that memory. Otherwise, that memory is going to be stale. Nobody is going to use that because the life cycle of the component is over. It means it is your responsibility. Just your when you are getting out of the browser window, please do some needful actions. Maybe clearing the connections if you have established to some socket servers, clearing the memory, clearing some random connections which you have made and whatnot. So whatever you want to have like as a good practices, all of those can be implemented in the component will unmount. So this is the last phase, and this occurs just before will component will unmount. It means this is called just before the component is being removed from the DOM. So the use cases are simple. You can clear the memory, whatever things needs to be done which are not needed anymore when the component is not present on the browser window. So we will see all of these phases in action, and we'll see how whatever we have talked just now, we'll validate all of these, and we'll also understand how we can use them and everything through the programmatic way, right?